So a slave born in my house is going to be my heir. But God tells him differently. And he says, your own son is going to be your heir. Abraham is 100 years old, maybe just 99 at that time. Sarah, not far behind, she was 90. It's not very logical that these two are going to have a child at that point of their lives. You know, we don't have many baptisms at American Lutheran Church, but we're going to have one. We're going to have one today, because not many of our members have children. Not many are young enough, although we have a few that could do that could do that. But today we have a baptism, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. God, in His promise, takes Abraham outside, and it's night. And He tells Abraham, look up! You know, looking up is a positive thing. You know, when you have somebody looking down all the time, they're not very positive, and they're usually not very happy. So you often heard the phrase, things are looking up. That means things are getting better. Things are positive. And Abraham looks up. And God says, look at the heavens and number the stars if you are able to number them. Look at the picture on your bulletin today. Can you count the number of stars on the front there? I do not think that you could. And God says, after He looks at the stars, so shall your descendants be. More than the number of stars you see in the heaven, and He says, even the sands of the sea. Out in the open country, there's really no way to start counting the stars. Now we have some of the brightest stars we think we have are satellites, actually, that we've sent up there ourselves. Satellites, stars, and planets. Down here in the valley, you can't see an awful lot of stars because there's so much light that goes up from the city. In fact, when you're out in the desert someplace, you can look and you can see the sky lighted up and you know there's a city there someplace. In Munns Park, where many of you know we spend most of the summer, there aren't many lights. And we can sit out on our deck that looks out into the forest and look up into the skies and see the stars. I do that so often, I even know when the jets are going to go across there during the course of the evening. And I have a ritual. As we sit out there, we usually have a glass of wine in the evening after dinner. And I sit there and I say, I'm not going in until I see the first star. And I keep looking up into the heavens until I see that first star. Abraham lifted up his head and he saw the stars. And it reads, and Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. There's more that transpires after that before a child is born. I mentioned before that Abraham tried a different way by having a son Ishmael by his wife's maid Hagar. But he wasn't the star that God had promised. The star that was first promised was the birth of a child named Isaac, born to a couple well beyond the age of having children. From Hebrews. Remember, Hebrews is another name for the Jews. It tells about that. By faith, Sarah herself conceived when she was past the age. She gave birth to the first star of God's promise. Therefore, from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born as many as the stars of the heaven. And stars kept being born and born again to the descendants of Abraham. Matthew begins with these words, Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. David is so important in that lineage of those stars born to his family. In fact, the symbol of the Jewish people is the Star of David, is it not? The Star of David. The promise that Abraham would have descendants as many as the stars. The 15th chapter of Genesis. But the birth of Isaac, that first star, didn't take place until the 21st chapter of the book of Genesis. And a lot went on in between that. And even though it said that Abraham believed, he had some doubts. He had some doubts. And God had to continue to reassure him that God was faithful to his promise. Genesis 17 reads, "When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, 'You shall be the father of many nations. Kings shall come forth from you.' And God says further to Abram, 'As for Sarah, I will bless her and give you a son by her. And she shall be the mother of nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Sarah, your wife, shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Isaac.'" And then you know what Abraham did? He fell on his face and laughed. He fell on his face and laughed at God. So you can see that even people of God, people of faith, can sometimes have doubts. And so if sometimes you have doubts, don't think that you're outside of the realm of God's people, because God still loves you anyway and still wants you to live by faith. In Hebrews it says, "By faith, Abraham." Then the birth of that first star, that promise in chapter 21. "The Lord visited Sarah and did to Sarah as he had promised, and Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and Abraham named him Isaac." A star is born. That star promised by God. After all the unlikely circumstances of that situation of Abraham and Sarah, a star is born. What did Abraham and Sarah do in regard to that promise? The next verse, after Isaac is born, says they had Isaac circumcised, because that's what God has said should be the sign of the covenant of God's people, of God's stars. Circumcision, the sign of that covenant. Today, we see the fulfillment of that covenant, but it's not circumcision. Something took the place of circumcision. The first act of women's liberation, when baptism replaced circumcision as God's sign of a covenant. And so now girls as well as boys could bear the sign of that covenant. And that covenant takes place today in the baptism of Ariel. Baptism, replacing circumcision. If you take my class on what we believe, maybe next February you can get some more stuff on that kind of thing. As Abraham and Sarah had Isaac circumcised as a sign of God's covenant, Volker and Jeannie are having Ariel baptized today. Baptized today. They want her to be a star, just as Isaac was. Volker and Jeannie just got custody of Ariel, didn't you? Just got custody of that. And I visited you before that, and I predicted that Ariel might be the first women's baseball pitcher in the major leagues because I watched her arm. She has got an arm that could throw stuff across that room and at the Francis house and land in the playpen that she had there. She has got a wicked arm. Like Abraham and Sarah, Volker and Jean didn't expect to have a child at this time of their life to raise. But they have. They have Ariel. And the first thing that they're doing as they take custody of her is the same thing that Abraham and Sarah did with Isaac. The first thing they're doing is having Ariel baptized. Baptized today. It's important to have that kind of faith. And I should tell you that they can have a 2-year-old because they don't live in Sun City, they live in Peoria. It's important for us to have faith. It's important for us to be faithful. But more important than that today is to be reminded that God is faithful. God is so faithful that he was faithful to Abraham and Sarah and that promise that he made in Genesis 15. The faithfulness of God is so much greater than our own faithfulness. Let's be reminded of that faithfulness of God when we look to the heavens and we see the stars. And be reminded that even though we're not a star athlete or a star actor or actress or singer, as a child of God, you are a star. You are a star. When you look into the heavens, be reminded of who you are as one of the descendants of God, as a child of God. So